As peer educators, the main part of our job is to ensure students' learning is properly being developed. And to do that, often we need to make sure students are engaging with us. We need to make sure they respond to our questions. We need to make sure they're paying attention in class. But it's easier said than done. Often you may get students who don't want to talk to you, students who don't feel like paying attention in class that day. Even the most skilled educators face this problem. Honestly, you really can't help everyone, and this problem is ongoing even today. As peer educators, one of the most important parts of our job is making sure students engage with their learning effectively. Part of that is making sure they're paying attention in class, making sure they pay attention and engage and respond to peer educators and instructors in the classroom. Of course, this isn't always something that you can expect from students. Not everyone is automatically going to love the class they're in. Not everyone is ready to pay attention for 75 minutes straight. This is an ongoing issue, and to tackle it, I've spoken to peer educators, instructors, and students to get their input on why this is happening and what can be done to solve this problem. In order to tackle the issue of student engagement, first we need to make sure we understand the problem. To do so, I've talked to people and asked for their comments on what the current state of student engagement is in classrooms today. One of the most common responses I got regarding classroom engagement was a welcoming environment. Students need to make sure they're in an environment that is conducive to their learning. They need to make sure they have the resources they need to get through the class, to make it through their assignments, to succeed in exams, and to pass a class not only with a good grade, but with a keen understanding of the subject material.
I would say that when it comes to student engagement, it kind of depends on like a student by student basis and such. Not all the times that a student is going to be like really willing out there to be like, okay, I know all the questions I have, I know everything that I want to get done. It's not always like that. And some students are a bit on the shyer end. But I think that like the way that I do mentoring or the way that I really interact with students is that like you have to be the first person to reach out your hand and really kind of support them through that process, like giving them the opportunity to like, reach back out. So I think usually the engagement is really good. It's just like having to initiate that and being like vulnerable so that they feel comfortable enough to like interact back.
Yeah, in my LA class, I would say students respond pretty well to the professor's questions. Anytime she asks a question, there's usually a lot of hands up. I think our professor is very easy to talk to, and I think that has a lot to do with the engagement in the class, because I've heard of the other section where the professor's not easy to talk to. They don't really raise their hands that much, and there's like barely any engagement.
So student engagement really is dependent on how the professor and the assistants in the classroom like lay out like the content. So definitely for professors who use more activities, they leave room for assistants to cater towards student engagement. So yeah, like the early steps, like at the beginning of the semester, there's not a lot of student engagement, I would say. And you could basically like to think about it is that, yeah, students don't know what to expect when it comes to a new class. So as an assistant, we want to make sure that students feel comfortable coming out if they have any questions. And usually by like middle of the semester, you can definitely see some students are more open to asking questions once they know how hard the content is and they need that extra help.
I think generally speaking, it really kind of helps. Like if you notice that like general approaches where you're trying to approach to all students isn't working, there probably is, like in my opinion, something bigger at play that we just don't know yet. And I think like later, like working with a student one-on-one, I think will help kind of like break that shell a little bit more, because it's really hard to like, I think open up sometimes in a bigger setting. Really kind of getting more personal, building that rapport individually, I think helps like kind of get to the root of it so you can understand the situation a bit more. Sometimes you don't always have the tools that you like think you need to use until you like know the problem at hand that you're trying to use them for, right? So that's how I think of it.
Of course, learning isn't easy, especially at the college level. Whether you're undergraduate or graduate, these classes are difficult, and even with instructors who prepare very strong curriculum and learning assistants and tutors and SI leaders who will help you through your classes, it's still a very stressful and tiresome process. It's very important to keep these ideas in mind when we're helping students and trying to get them to engage with us. It's important to realize that learning is a process. It's not something that can be done overnight, it's something that's done gradually. And because of that, people can't always maintain the optimal levels for the entire process. There are times where you'll get stressed, times where students will lose courage, they'll lose motivation, especially when they don't understand the material. It's a downward spiral we all struggle with at some point.
I guess in my experience, the students who are the most engaged tend to do well, but I've never quite been sure if it's what the chicken and the egg thing is, right?
Yeah.
If they're already understanding it,
Right.
so that helps them engage, or if because they're engaged, they're learning it better. And I think there's kind of a good cycle for the best students that they get more engaged. Oh, I understand. I want to know this. But it can be like a negative cycle for the bad students who are not getting it, so they don't want to engage, and then they don't get it, and then so.
I think building your sort of structure of the material in a way that like slowly builds on what people are learning is another thing that can support engagement. So sort of like if you're off on the deep end right away, right? Like it's hard to ask people to share what they're thinking if it's just so far beyond what where they're comfortable at the moment. Like you gotta master the basics, and then once you get that, you can sort of like start building up from there. But I think it's easy when there's a lot of pressure to cover a ton of content for instructors to just like keep pushing through without building in checks.
And though it seems obvious, there's a matter of circumstance at hand. Classes are at different times of day. Different people are more attentive at different times of day. And beyond that, there's so many other variables going on in the classroom. How big is the class? How active are your classmates? How engaging is your professor? There's so many things that go into a class structure that can't be solved by a single person alone, whether that's your instructor, your fellow students, your peer educators, or even the administration.
Well, I have, it depends, I think, what class you have first, what class, and also the timing of the class. I have seen, whether being an LA or being a TA, I was working, and also as a general student, when I'm in some class as a student, and then I want to answer, but I don't want to answer or talk too much, because other people are like, why is this guy talking and answering all of it, right? So I have had like different situations, but I have seen people less interactive in the morning classes. And I think morning, well, it depends, because I have seen so many different reasoning from students. So like the midday, we just had a lunch. First, other one, it's early morning, give me a break, kind of. And I was like, it's almost the end of the day, I'm tired. So there are three different, so which time is the best then, right?
Right.
So it kind of depends how long of a day they had, or how early they started, or did they just eat lunch and they don't want to talk much. Depends on the time, but I always try to include everyone when I was like working as a PhD.
Really, I always feel like labs have taught me a lot more, probably because it's more hands-on, but the lectures, CS46A was, both professors, CS46A and 46B, are very nice, very encouraging, but I don't feel that same like desire to want to learn and practice and like be engaged. It's not as strong. But in terms of student engagement in both of the lectures, I think there's always the same people asking for help and raising their hand. This year it's a humongous lecture, so the professor definitely gives a lot of incentive to raise your hand, and I think that's led to a lot of people, including me, to participate more.
To further analyze this issue, we also want to take a look at the experiences people have had in the classroom, whether that's instructors and how they formed their curriculum to either engage students or not do so at all. We need to look at peer educators, whether that's in the classroom, in tutoring sessions, or in workshops or SI sessions. How do they engage with students, and how do students' reactions affect their work as a peer educator? And of course, we need to look at it from the student's perspective. Why do some students not want to engage in class? What are their classmates doing? How do they feel about their instructors or their peer educators? It's important to understand all sides of the situation. For peer educators specifically, it's important to note that very many of us are students as well. We're just people. We have a capacity for empathy. We have a sense of achievement. a sense of pride even. So when students are working with us, how well we're able to impact them can impact our performance as well. This can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, I think like I learned a lot from like the students that I even help with too in my everyday classes. I think definitely like it melts my heart whenever I see like honestly when a student like actually does raise their hand and they're specifically calling me over them as a professor. I would say that just makes my day, because then you think about it, like these students are starting to like slowly recognize you as a source that they can lean on and get that support from. And definitely in my everyday classes, it teaches me that like if this student is confident enough to reach out and ask for questions, I could do the same thing in my classes as well. So I'm not like again, it's like building that community that he's like, you're also a student in that same field together.
Yeah, I would say it affects my style. I don't want to say unmotivating, but when a student's not like talking or like asking anything, or like they're just
Like they're trying to get rid of you, right?
Yeah. Then I'm like, okay, should I be here or should I be with a student who actually wants to engage with me and wants to learn that concept more in depth?
Effective learning takes many forms, and let's consider different perspectives. There's the individual student, the holistic view of a person, not just how they are in class, but how they are outside of class, what they're going through in their personal life, what they have, what commitments they have outside of classes. There's also the idea of the class as a collective. While understanding individuals is important, when the class is really big, you need to understand that all students need to be kept at a certain pace to make sure everyone is moving forward. And the bigger the class is, the harder it may be to actually facilitate engagement with the individual.
Well, I would say some students are just like, I mean, thinking back, like I think I was pretty reserved too, and I was scared of my lab instructor and learning assistant and everything. But I think so I don't just walk away, but like I ask them if they need any more help, and usually they give like a sign like, we're good, thanks, like they'll call you back, or like it's very rare that a student just sits there doing nothing.
Right.
But I think it's more so at like the beginning of the semester when I don't know any student too well, and I'm just walking up randomly and I'm like, hey guys, I'm Tanisha, what's your name? And they're like, what? Why are you here? But yeah, I think it's very like,
it's like a warming up.
Yeah.
Well, so in my smaller class, I tend to find like one or two students that are definitely not the best and not the worst, and I always look to them for like reassurance that they're with me or they're not, and I can see, oh, they're nodding. I'm like, oh, okay, because this makes sense, and if they're like, and I can tell they're not, and I change who that is a little bit from class to class, but like I know who the student is in this one class that I will always look to see. But in 180 people in Physics 51, I don't know, it doesn't work as well, right? I mean, like by the time I find who I'm looking for, it's not gonna work. So I don't know how to do it in a big class to get feedback.
As peer educators, we go through different types of training. A lot of this is to develop our skills as educators. This is a term called pedagogy. This isn't really restricted to learning assistants who take a class specifically labeled as pedagogy. Rather, it takes different forms, from understanding content, being able to effectively convey that to students, or even talk moves and tutoring strategies. They're all very important. And one thing that's come up a lot recently in modern pedagogy is interactive learning. A lot of classes up until now still use the basic lecture format, and maybe that's effective depending on the content. But these days, if we want to engage students, interaction is often something people ask for. They need to actually interact with the content. They need to interact with the professor, with their learning assistant, with their tutor. If students are just listening, there's often not much going on in the background to make sure they're actively picking up on that information.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question. I'm like thinking of the answer, and I really think that student engagement, I feel like them taking the first step is how they like allow us to engage in that sense. I think it is really important because I can't mentor a student who I didn't know needed help in the first place. So I really do think that like that initial portion of student engagement is really important in all of our work, because I think all of us really do want to help, but we can't help people we don't really know need it in that sense. So I think that initial student engagement is important. I think that continuing student engagement, it's like when you're in a mentoring session, it's really important that you're making the effort, but it's equally important that they also like reflect that effort. If we can see that there's effort being put, that we can see that effort is also being reflected and shared, then I think that just makes the like bond and the process a lot easier and a lot more smooth.
I personally believe that active learning is really helpful for everyone. Well, it depends on people, but personally, I have seen maximum number of people, they really like interactive classes or classes where they just don't want to hear teachers talking, right? So, and the classes that I have been taking in San Jose State, very few of them, they did not have any problem solving or non-interactive. Almost all of the classes that I have taken was very interactive. And well, one of the reasons that our position exists is also because we are embedded in the class. If there is no interactive time, then what are hours going to do, right? So most of the classes, and then that really depends because that's how students learn better. I think they learn better, and that's how I think as an instructor point of view, when I was a TA, I wanted my students to talk to me, participate, and then tell me what you are thinking so that I know at that moment, are they getting this topic? Are they getting the sense of what this topic means, how to solve the problem, right? So that interaction is, I think, is huge in either both in learning from a student's perspective, as a student also, and as a TA or for the professor's perspective, it's equally.
But outside of classes, whenever I'm having a tutoring session or something, students do tend to be like responsive, and I do get a lot of like recurring appointments because of that. Because I research like before the classes, before our tutoring sessions, I'll text them an email and be like, what kind of study materials you're trying to go over. If you have something, send me. If not, just tell me the topic so I can go through them and revise my knowledge about it, so I can help you out even better rather than just shooting in the dark. And when that happens, it's much better because that's much a better of a tutoring session that happens if the tutor is also low prepared beforehand. But there have been some tutoring appointments where I have not been that much prepared, but still, like at that instant, like I know what to do because I've taken these classes before. And of course, like we're allowed to use the internet to like additional help as well. So that comes in real play.
In the many conversations I had, there was always a certain point that caught my interest. And that's the extremes that are taken when it comes to students who lack engagement. More specifically, what if a student doesn't want to engage with an instructor, with a peer educator, with the content? As educators, it's our responsibility to make sure students have the resources they need to effectively learn, both in and out of the classroom. But more often than not, a lot of that is in the students' hands. They need to understand that learning is a process that takes initiative. And as much as we're there to help, it's not always possible. So I wanted to know what people thought of this situation. What should be done? Or even, can anything be done? And if not, what should we do? Can we do anything? The main point in this conflict is that some students might even feel intimidated by instructors or even peer educators. Despite us peer educators being students like them, they often might see us as an authority figure or someone they have to look up to. It's not something that's easy to overcome, and when that's the case, it's hard to ask for support.
I mean, like, I hate to say it, but like after a certain point, it probably is just a lost cause. There's only so much you can help someone without them wanting to help themselves. Right? So I think like if someone told me 10 times go to peer connections tutor, and I'm like, no, I'd rather fail. Like, you know, like not those words, but you know, like if,
something to that effect.
Yeah, if you're not taking your resources and like looking at all the like benefits someone is actually literally handing to you, like there's only so much we can do. But maybe at the early stages, just like, I don't know, maybe getting them to talk to people who have used those resources or have used those services. Because like sometimes they're probably more receptive to like yours instead of us.
Yeah,
I think there's a fine line between pushing too hard and pushing to a perfect amount. So, because you could be pushing to a perfect amount and you push a little bit extra and it's over too much, and then you're on just getting on the student again and again, and he'll be like, this tutor is low-key like kind of harassing me to take tutoring sessions. He's just they themselves might be like demoralized because of that. They're like, oh, this tutor just thinks like I'm not good enough to like study myself or something like that. Or there might be some students, okay, this tutor is actually like making an effort for me. He's coming out of his way to like talk to me, do that. It depends how a person perceives it and how the tutor convey that message to the students.
It's not easy work, but it's honest work. And it's work that we should be doing. Even if we can't help all students, even if some of them won't like us for doing so, it's important for us to keep our best intentions in mind. Though we can't be there for everyone or can't solve everyone's problems, our duty is to make sure people have the resources they need and that we are available for them when they are finally ready to use those resources.
As a learning assistant, there are many students who come to class and they kind of sit there, and just because they think class they feel achieved, but they don't pay attention. So I think as a learning assistant, it is kind of a struggle to reach out to those students, but it's still part of our duty to like make sure that like they are somewhat engaged in the content, make sure that like they have some form of structure when it comes to the course. But it's really up to the student themselves if they want to open up about their or what they want to do in the class. So like again, like even if they're not paying attention or they are rejecting the sort of like help that I try to provide, it really is like up to like I asked once, and if like it doesn't work out, then it's like I'll let you continue what you're doing. He's like, I'm always here if you need it.
Yeah, I think these kind of situations are really hard because we're definitely reaching out the hand, but they're not like reciprocating. They're not like sharing back that like, oh, I need that help, even though you're like, okay, I think you do need maybe a little bit of help, but you're not reaching out the hand, right? But I think those are the students we kind of should help the most. I think that I was actually listening to like a keynote the other day, and I thought that like I really appreciated their conversation where they said a wall of communication, something like the lack of communication is usually from like lack of rapport. And that really stuck with me. They said it in a more profound way, to be honest and such. But sometimes we haven't built that connection yet where they feel like close or vulnerable enough to us. I think that those are the students that we should try to help out the most. But like I do acknowledge that we also have our own limitations as like peer educators, and like boundaries are important and kind of knowing when to stop and such. I mean, I think that sometimes you can try as much as you can, try as much in your position. I think if we give up on a student, I think that who else is kind of going to believe in them in that sense? Like, you don't know how many other people are going to be really supporting them in their respective lives and such, so we shouldn't try to stop on our ends, is at least my belief, you know? As long as we can try. I know it can get frustrating. If you can get past the frustrating part, then I think keep trying is very worth it at the end.
I do think that at some point, I mean, I'm never gonna say like, let's give up on a student, but I think just recognizing that there's limited time for like peer educators and for instructors, like I generally, you know, like am persistent, and then at a certain point, it's like, if you know what's here, I'm here for you.
But they have to take that step.
But there's some amount of like, like I remember when I was working with a learning assistant in the big class was having this as well, where it's like, I think it's important to continue to reach out to this person, but it's also important for you to spend time with other people, and like trying to balance that I think is really challenging. But I also think if there are other people who are like asking for help, right, if you spend all of your time on one person, then that's also not really productive. But I feel almost bad saying that, like, but I never want to say like, let's just give up on this person. But I do think that there's some prioritization where it's like, if they're really resistant or if they're hostile, like there's only so much you can do up to a point before you have to like let them simmer and reach out, or, you know, check in on them later. I think something that's a good strategy is like check in, give people time, check in again. But that might sort of help spread it out. So you're not just like feel like you're hounding one person, but also giving them consistency.
In some cases, students just need a push. Not everyone will respond, and some will, but you need a certain kind of push. Some students need a gentle touch, they need to be eased into it. Others are really stubborn and probably won't ask for support until they're about to fail the class. Though it's not ideal, at least they're asking for help. So it's our job to recognize those tells, recognize what makes a student more motivated, what will get them to accept the help they need, and employ that in our activities as peer educators, or speak to our faculty partners, talk to instructors, help change the landscape of education to cater to and more effectively help students of different and diverse learning styles.
Well, I mean, and sometimes you have to make a decision for yourself, but what's gonna prompt somebody to reevaluate that position? It could be a test sometimes, could be a quiz, could be, I mean, sometimes they have in their mind that, okay, I'm totally behind, but I'll just study the night before and I'll learn it all and I'll be fine. And so if they try that and it fails, maybe that's a chance to reevaluate.
Right.
Like, okay, well, that didn't work. Maybe I should seek help. I don't know. That's not a great solution because then they have to fail before they reevaluate. And it doesn't even always work then.
And of course, most importantly, we need to understand what can actually be done in this situation. What can we do knowing what's going on, knowing why all this happens? What do we do to fix this problem? What do we do to engage students better? What do we do to get students to care more about the material, what the instructors are trying to do for them, what the peer educators are trying to do for them? When learning, especially more complex concepts, what's important is actually how much you understand the foundational concepts behind it. Because of that, a lot of professors, they expect students to know things. They expect them to have the prerequisite materials. But do they? If a student doesn't understand or comprehend the concept, or at least its foundational ideas, how are they going to expand on it? How can you expand on what you don't have?
What I kind of wish could be done is, even though it's impractical in this class, there's a lot of low stakes quizzing. Little quiz here, little quiz here, little quiz here, to maybe make people reassess more often. You know, having a big midterm, one big reassessment, even though it's almost practical for this class, isn't in a clicker questions, I'm sure, aren't high enough stakes. Maybe just some event that could get everyone to change their perspective on accepting help.
And while students may be independent, some may not understand they're struggling. Maybe they need someone to tell them that, or maybe they need to fail that exam to tell them that, hey, you're not doing very well in this class and you might want to seek out some assistance with your classes. It's not meant to demoralize students, but more so, many don't have the self-awareness that we as peer educators have, either by our training or just by our nature as students. Beyond critical thinking skills and study skills, it's important for students to develop self-awareness, understanding what makes them tick, when they get stressed, when they need to seek out resources, when they can't do it alone anymore.
Well, first, as a TA, I always tried my best not to be a friend with my students, but be friendly.
Okay.
Right? There's a huge difference between those two words because you have to have that boundary because you're going to be grading them.
Right.
And that should not affect how you interact with them and all that. So I think if students can feel that from any of the professors at TA, which I have felt as a TA, because they told me in my source, like how being friendly, I help them, even though I am in the position of power, they call it as a TA. But if any professors or any TAs, if they find that, I don't know, loophole or whatnot, how can I get my students be open about not knowing it?
Right.
That's the whole idea, right? If we cannot talk to our professor saying, I know you taught this last class, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it.
Right.
In order to say that to your professor, you take it needs that gut, right?
Right.
But having an environment where students can come to you openly, can you please walk me through this one time?
Yeah.
Can you please start from the beginning so that I can understand, either in office hour or in class, to raise hand and be able to ask, can I please get that once again?
Right.
Can you please repeat that, right? If you can have that environment where students can freely come to you, ask you, approachable, friendly, not being a friend,
Right.
I would do like, maybe, I don't know if you can do a short survey or like any interactive sessions with the students or office hour asking them, what do you think? Should I change anything in my lecture? I've seen professor ask me, how do you think about my lecture in the office hour?
Yeah.
Right? Any suggestions that I do these problems in a different way? Do you guys like more problems in the class or me lecture? Because some of the professors, they don't want to lecture.
Yeah.
I feel like I talk too much in the class. What do you think, Elvin, or other students, right? Those are the professors I feel like they want to make class better.
Right.
And of course, there's a simple matter of passion. Why are you here? Why are you in college? What motivates you to learn this material? Why are you in this class? Why do you think your peer educator or your instructor wants you to know this so much? There's no point in learning or doing anything for that matter if you don't have a reason to do so. Without a reason, you're going through the motions and you're never going to be able to master material when you're not actively pursuing a goal and engaging with that goal or the process to achieve it.
I think I've seen so many people, I feel more encouraged when you encourage them, when you give them that, like, even if you make an activity like engaging or like interesting, I think they can feel a little like hesitant. But once you encourage them that they're going the right step, once they feel like they're going the right way, I think that's just something I feel like has always helped. I've seen so many people like come out of their shell or feel more passionate because they felt like their work was being validated, that their efforts were being validated, and that they were in a safe place to do it.
I think it starts with inspiring them to get excited about the material. With, at least for me, rather than focusing on them trying to learn the content, I first focused on why they may want to learn the content. Building rapport was a huge thing too. But I feel like, and my thoughts on it is, it would be extremely hard to teach. It would be extremely hard to teach me if I didn't want to try. But maybe if you approached me talking about the video game I was playing or something, being like, oh, did you know that was coded with Java? Then I'd be like, oh, okay, so what is this class? How can I get there? But yeah, I don't, yeah, it's such a difficult subject. I hope you guys figure it out.
In the end, despite watching this short case study, watching any other training video, doing research on this, there will always be compromises made. There will always be students who don't want to be helped. There will always be people beyond our reach. But that doesn't mean we should stop. If anything, it just means we have to keep trying. We help those we can help, and for those we can't, we just need to make sure we're there for them if they ever do need our help. It's not easy work, but it's work worth doing.